Chapter 20. A Smuggler Among Us. What a web we weave when we try to deceive. Gaston was a handsome man in his 40s. His jet black hair and striking hazel eyes, as well as his square jaw and clean-shaven face, inspired honesty and truth. He certainly wasn't the picture of his old spitting and cussing blacksmith that one could have imagined him to be. To the contrary, his blue shirt and corduroy trousers looked as if washed and even pressed that very morning. The stables were clean, the straw fresh, and the walkways were watered down regularly. All in all, Dan was very impressed. He and Gustavo received a warm welcome as soon as they walked in the smith's shop. "Signores Ricciulli, so glad you're back. Renaldo told me that you had a very good trip and that we might have a passage booked for the Americas." "Let me stop you right there, Gaston," Dan cut in. "I'm not gone yet. Besides, I don't know if I'm going anywhere. I will not go until I've cleared your name and reputation. You know that, don't you?" "Yes, I know that you will do everything you can to help, Signor. But how do you find the real smuggler in this place? It's not like we have a lot of people we could suspect, do we?" "But you might have an idea who put or forgot the pouch in your coach," Gustavo suggested. "Well, I can't really tell, Signor Vicenti. The pouch was discovered days after I came back from the coast, as you know. I searched my head to remember who rode the coach before the pouch was discovered, like you asked me to do before you left, and I came up with 3 names," Gaston said, pulling a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. He handed it to Dan. Dan peered down at the 3 names, and suddenly, as if a light bulb had been turned on in his brain, he knew who 2 of these people were. "Armando Grandioso. That's the grocer, isn't it?" Dan said, tapping his forefinger on the note. "What would the grocer want with cocaine?" "I don't know," Gaston said, "but he travelled in my coach that week, as he does every month to get his dry goods from the coast." "Okay," Dan nodded. All the while, Gustavo looked over Dan's shoulder to the other names. "You got Signora Calando on your list. What would she want with cocaine?" "Again, Signor Vicenti, I wouldn't know, but she travels to the coast to get some linen from the islands every so often. When she gets an order for new cloths, she goes to Bura, always to the same store like a warehouse." "And this 3rd name, I don't recognize it," Dan queried. "Who is Amur Constantine?" "Oh, he doesn't live in the village, but he comes through with his own carriage, I'd say every month or so. He stops here and stays at the local inn for the night." "But if he is not using your carriage, why would you put him on the list?" Dan was curious now. "It's because Amur is always snooping through my place. I don't know what he really wants, but he says he'd like to have a shop and stables like mine where he lives." "Where does he live exactly?" Gustavo asked. "I think he's got a house on the coast. I mean, that's what he told me." Dan nodded. "When was the last time you saw him?" "It was while you were gone, Signor. He came in with his carriage and he looked at the shop again, and then he went to the stables. I didn't go with him. I stayed in the shop talking to his driver." "I see," Dan said, nodding. "Tell you what we'll do. We're going to turn this place upside down." "Why?" Gaston asked, obviously puzzled by the suggestion. "Because I'm sure we will find some more pouches of cocaine in the stable. Your Mr. Constantine is probably a smuggler or a trafficker who needs to have a midway store sort of thing between the East Coast and Salerno." "But why having me accused of smuggling if he wants me to work for him? I don't understand." "Well, being accused is different from being convicted, Gaston. This Amir Constantine has probably made an accusation to the police, knowing you could not be arrested without evidence of trafficking. A pouch of cocaine will not get you arrested, but another dozen of them might see you imprisoned for a long time. So we need to find a stash before the police come sniffing around. And Signor Constantine is not intending to have you arrested or imprisoned, no. His goal is to blackmail you or threatening you with further accusations so that you would start working for him. You or Renaldo would soon be asked to make a trip to Salerno to deliver a package to some client or other. You would not get arrested or prosecuted as long as you cooperate with Signor Constantine." "Well, you think there are more packs of this stuff in the stables?" Gaston didn't seem convinced that he had probably been targeted by this Constantine fellow. "Yes, Gaston, I am almost certain of it, and to prove your innocence and ensure that Signor Constantine is never bothering you again, we first need to find the stash, and then play a little game with him." "What sort of game, Signor Ricciulli?" "I'll explain later, Gaston, but for now we need to find the cocaine, okay?" For the next 3 hours, Gaston, Renaldo, Dan, and Gustavo literally turned the smith's shop and stables upside down, Renaldo took the 4 horses to a pasture adjacent to the stables before the men began to empty every stall of anything and everything that could have contained pouches or packets of the drug. They were nearing the end of their efforts, without any success, when 3 of them heard Renaldo shout, "Here, here, it must be here." They rushed to the stall in question to find Renaldo's head poking out of the floor. He said, "It must be down here. There are 2 boxes I've never seen before, Gaston." Still surprised that there was some sort of cellar below the building, Dan and Gustavo bent down to look at the shelves surrounding the staircase. There were, in fact, 2 small cardboard boxes on one of the shelves. "What do you use this cache for usually, Gaston?" Dan asked him. "That's where I keep all the medicines the vet gives me. Since the stall is rarely used, I dug a small room to store things away from the heat." "How did Signor Constantine know about the cache?" Gustavo asked. "Did you show it to him?" "Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I did. One of the times he visited the stables to see how they were laid out, I showed him the cache and told him what it was for. See, the vet can't come sometimes for days, so he gave me some medication to treat the horses if they had some colic or things like that. I couldn't buy another horse if I lost one." "Okay, so this Amir Constantine knew where to put the 2 boxes we see there," Dan noted. "Let's see if they contain cocaine, though." He looked down at Renaldo. "Why don't you hand me one of the boxes?" Renaldo nodded and reached up to hand a sealed box to Dan. They all looked at it, and finally Dan slit the cover open with his pocket knife. "I guess you were right, Signor Ricciulli. These are pouches of white powder, probably the same as the one that was given to the police." "Yes, I would say so, Gaston. But now let's find out if this is really cocaine or something else." "What else could it be?" "I don't think it's anything other than cocaine, Gaston, but I prefer being certain of my facts before I go to the police with these boxes." He looked down at Renaldo again. "Let's get the other box out of there too, if you don't mind." Gaston, as any equestrian or stable hand, was always conscious of his surroundings, and right now the young smithy looked out of the stable's door and noticed the menacing storm clouds looming over the horizon. "After you've closed the cache, Renaldo, I'd like you to get the horses back in the stables before the storm, okay?" "Sure will," Renaldo said, hopping out of the cellar and handing the second box to Gustavo before running out of the stables. Dan had to smile. No trafficker would care for his animals the way Gaston and Renaldo do. He thought the idea is ludicrous. When they entered the small house at the back of the stables with the 2 boxes of drugs under arms, Gustavo and Dan were greeted by Gaston's wife. "Dear Lord, I am so very happy you're back, Signor Ricciulli. Gaston has been so very worried." The lovely young woman, slender and hair down to her waist, looked down at the boxes. "What have you got there? Are these presents from the city?" Dan shook his head. "I wish they were, dear Isabella. They're evidence that, I believe, will clear your husband's name." "Truly? But that's wonderful, Signor Generoso." She opened the door wide. "Do come in, please. Please go and sit in the living room. I will get some coffee ready." While Isabella was preparing a fresh pot of coffee in the nearby kitchen, Gaston and Renaldo came in. "All safe and sound they are now," Gaston said, sounding relieved. "Nothing worse for a young mare to stand in the rain for any length of time. She'd catch a cold, and I would have to put her down. And it's no good for the geldings either." He sat down in his chair. Gustavo and Dan had already taken a seat on the sofa while Renaldo joined them. The 2 boxes were now on the coffee table. "How will you tell if they really contain drugs, Signor?" Gaston asked, nodding toward the incriminating evidence. Tasting it is the best way," Dan replied, taking one of the pouches out of the open carton. He put a finger into the pouch, pulled it out, and placed a bit of the powder on his tongue. Although Dan had never tasted cocaine, this was certainly not sugar or flour. This was a drug of some kind. He turned to Gustavo. "Have a taste," he told him, handing the pouch to him. "But I think we're dealing with pure cocaine." Gustavo shook his head as soon as he pulled his finger out of his mouth. "Not cocaine, Generoso. This is pure heroin, unfortunately." "You mean it's some Asian opiate that they used in medicines?" Gaston asked, wide-eyed now. "Yes, it is," Dan replied. "You see, although cocaine could be sold to the wineries in the area, which I thought might be the case here, heroin can't. It needs to be handled with the greatest care to use it in some medications. Only pharmaceutical outfits are authorized to handle this stuff." "You mean it's worse than handling cocaine?" Gaston sounded desperate. "I'm afraid so, but it's really good that we found it before the police did. Otherwise you could have kissed goodbye to life the way you know it." Well, said Isabella, as she came in with a tray full of cups and goodies, I'm very happy you found whatever it is you found, Signor Ricciulli. She put down the tray when Dan had removed the boxes from the coffee table. Gaston has been so worried that I'm sure even the horses have felt it. She tittered. Help yourselves with the coffee and the pastries. I baked them this morning. She threw a wink in Gustavo's direction. I knew you'd come for a visit, Vicente. You can't resist my baking, can you? Dan would have sworn he saw Gustavo blush, but he only smiled and nodded. So what is the name you mentioned earlier, Senor? Gaston asked him. Gaston asked after he had eaten one of his wife's biscottis. We are going to hand the real opiate to the police and explain the situation to Chief Alfonso. From what I read in your documentation, and as you know, he is not keen on arresting you right now. He would prefer finding another, or the real, culprit. We will tell the chief to expect the perpetrator to be looking into your cellar for the cartons that we would have left instead of these. Dan pointed to the boxes underneath the table. So when Constantine comes to pick up the boxes, the police can nab him. Gaston nodded, yet he didn't look convinced. What if the chief don't believe you? What if they think it's a trick? They'll still believe Signor Constantine, and they'll put me in jail, won't they? I will not let that happen, Gaston, and I'll tell you why that is. If Chief Alfonso here shows any opposition to the plan, I will go back to Salerno and demand that the officer in charge comes to our village and witnesses Constantine taking the boxes out of the cellar.